Okay. Welcome everybody, and thank you for coming to Weekend Projects Zoning Q&A with the City of Westerville. With us today presenting is Bryan Wagner. He is the Code Enforcement Supervisor for the City of Westerville. So this is the person that you want to ask these questions of. So Bryan, thank you for coming today, and we look forward to your program.
Thank you, Jessica, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending this morning. I really appreciate it. My name is Bryan Wagner. As Jessica said, I'm the Code Enforcement Supervisor with the City of Westerville, and I've been with the city for about 8 years now, and I work in the Planning and Development Department. I truly feel blessed to work for the city that I love and the city I grew up in. I grew up here. I went to elementary school, middle school. I graduated from North. When I went to OSU, I was a commuter student, so I continued to live in Westerville up until I graduated from OSU. My wife graduated from Otterbein, and my oldest son is going to Otterbein right now, and he's in his second year. So I'm very connected to Westerville, and I love Westerville, and I just feel very lucky to work for this city. And prior to working for Westerville, I worked for the Franklin County Municipal Court in the Environmental Court, which is a specialty court which hears building code violations and zoning code violations and animal cruelty cases. And I can tell you it's much better to work for the City of Westerville than it is to work downtown in the courthouse. And so just to talk a little bit about what the Planning and Development Department does. The Planning and Development Department is responsible for guiding and administering and reviewing development that occurs on private property and public property in the City of Westerville. And the reason that the Planning and Development Department reviews and approves and inspects those planning projects is that we are obligated to ensure that that development complies with applicable city codes, like the zoning code, and to also ensure that that development complies with state statutes, such as the building code, and federal requirements, like the Clean Water Act. And the Planning and Development Department also provides engineering services and building services and zoning services and code enforcement services to the community. And the department is responsible for enforcing sections of city code. And the department is made up by four divisions. The building division, which is responsible for reviewing building permits and performing building inspections. The engineering division, which is responsible for traffic engineering in the city and reviewing public and private infrastructure design and construction. And it's also responsible for administering all of the capital improvement projects in the city, such as the Uptown Improvement Project, which is occurring right now. And the Planning Division, which is responsible for short-term and long-range planning in the city. The Planning Division reviews development plans and provides administrative support to the boards and commissions in the city, such as the Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Uptown Review Board. And then the Code Enforcement Division, and that's the division I work in, and as the name suggests, that's the division that enforces city code. And Jessica reached out to me a few months ago and said that the city or the library gets questions about zoning code and gets questions about permits and what type of projects need permits and what type of projects don't. And I have to admit, I have to confess that I'm a little bit of a geek, a little bit of a nerd when it comes to code. I really like talking about this subject, so I jumped at the chance when Jessica offered reached out to ask if we'd be willing to host a presentation about this. I jumped on that because I really enjoy talking about this subject. And so let's just jump right into it, and let's talk about what type of work needs a permit and what type of work doesn't need a permit. And to answer that question, it's helpful to understand that there are actually different types of permits. There are building permits and plumbing permits and heating, ventilation, and air conditioning permits and electrical permits and zoning permits. And There are instances when you might be doing something at your house and you won't need any of these permits. And then there might be other situations in which you might need maybe one or two of these permits. And then in the situation where you're building a brand new house in the city of Westerville, you're going to need all these permits just to verify that the work that you're doing complies with city code and state code and any applicable federal requirements. So let's talk about building permits first. And I should say, if you have any questions during this presentation, feel free to type those questions into the chat, and I'll do my best to answer those questions. And if you ask a question that I don't know, I'll do my best to follow up with you and do the necessary research so I can give you that question later on. So please feel free, if you have any questions, to type those into the chat as I'm speaking. But talking about building permits, so there are instances when you need a building permit, and then there are instances when you do not need a building permit. And for a deck, you will need a building permit if you are building a deck that is attached to your house. Regardless of how big or how small that deck is, if you are building a deck and that deck is attached to the house, you will need a building permit for that. In addition, if you are building a deck that is 30 inches or more in height from the ground, you need a building permit for that, regardless of if the deck is attached to the house or not. If it's 30 inches or more in height, you need a building permit. And then also, if you're building a deck that is larger than 200 square feet in size, like a 10 by 20 deck, you need a building permit for that, regardless if that 10 by 20 deck is attached to the house or not attached to the house, or regardless of the height. So starting out, I'm throwing a little bit of a curveball at you, and I understand that, but it's a little bit convoluted when you need a permit for a deck and when you don't. And that's because, and it's convoluted because that's the way in which the state building code is written. So if you are building a deck that is 50 square feet and it's not attached to the house, maybe it's sitting out in the backyard somewhere, and it's only 12 inches off the ground, and I said it's only a 50 square foot deck, then in that situation, you would not need a building permit for that deck. In addition, if you are finishing a basement, or if you are installing a basement egress window, or if you are installing a room addition or a porch, or maybe you're constructing a 3-season room, you would need building permits for those. Also, if you are planning on putting up a swimming pool at your property, even a swimming pool that's temporary, like an inflatable swimming pool, and that swimming pool holds more than 24 inches of water, you would need a building permit for that swimming pool, even if it's temporary, because the state building code requires some fencing requirements for swimming pools that hold that much water. So for a building permit, again, a building permit is required for decks that are attached to the house, or decks that exceed 30 inches in height, or decks that exceed 200 square feet in size. And also building permits required for basement finishing, and for installing a basement egress window, and for constructing room additions and porches and 3-season rooms. And then, especially now with the, I know JC's is open, but the city's swimming pool was closed, and a lot of the municipal swimming pools in the area were closed. We had a run of swimming pool permits in spring. We had a lot of residents install swimming pools on their properties, temporary swimming pools and permanent swimming pools. And again, the state building code requires swimming pools that hold 24 inches or more of water to get a building permit, just to ensure that the swimming pool complies with safety requirements and fencing requirements. And then if you were in a situation like I was not too long ago, earlier this year, I replaced the windows in my house. If you replace the windows or doors, and if you are in that process going to increase the size of the opening, like make the door opening larger or to make the window openings larger, you would need a building permit for that. And if you're doing any interior remodeling or exterior remodeling for that, you would need a building permit. And if you're doing anything structural in nature, if you are removing walls, opening the space inside of your house, cutting into wall studs, cutting into floor joists, cutting into trusses, if you're doing anything structural, you would need a building permit. There are several situations where you don't need a building permit. And examples include repairs. If you're just doing general repairs around your home, you do not need a building permit from the City of Westerville. If you're replacing your shingles or the sheathing or the roof underlayment, you do not need a permit for that. You do not need a permit if you're replacing windows of doors of the same size, which is what I did earlier this year. When I replaced my windows, I did not increase the opening of the window. And so as a result, I did not need a building permit. Also, if you're replacing siding or replacing your deck boards, you do not need a building permit. If you're doing painting, if you're working on your gutters or downspouts, or if you're doing anything that is non-structural in nature, you do not need a building permit from the City of Westerville. And later on, I'm going to provide some contact information for the Planning and Development Department. And our rule of thumb is if when in doubt, please contact us. If you have any questions or concerns, we would much rather talk to you at the beginning of your project and answer any questions that you have and review any code questions that you might have and review any code requirements, if any, before you start the project, as opposed to at the end of the project, especially if at the end of the project, you might have inadvertently done something that doesn't comply with city code or state code or federal code. So when in doubt, please contact us, and I'll have my have the telephone number and address and email address that you can use to contact us. So that's building permits. And if anybody has any questions about building permits, please feel free to type it into the chat, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have. And I'll move on.
So since there are city and state codes, does Westerville enforce both of those or just city codes?
Wonderful question. That's a great question. So in the state of Ohio, we have a state residential building code, a state commercial building code, a state electric code, state plumbing code, state mechanical code, and the City of Westerville is a certified state of Ohio building division. So we are authorized to perform those inspections on behalf of the state of Ohio. And so the City of Westerville gets audited, and the City of Westerville staff has to be certified to do this work and get the necessary continuing education units to keep our certifications in good standing with the state of Ohio. So yeah, we do those inspections on behalf of the state. Okay, great question. And so let's talk about plumbing permits. Jessica, can you see the plumbing permit slide?
Yes, we can.
Great, wonderful. So in the case of plumbing permits, a plumbing permit is required if you are replacing a hot water heater. Also, plumbing permits are required for new water lines that you may be installing in your house, and new sewer lines that you may be installing inside of your house, and new plumbing vent lines. In addition, a plumbing permit is required for gas lines, and that to me always seems a little counterintuitive. It seems funny that you would have to get a plumbing permit for installing gas lines, but the same code that applies to piping that carries liquid also applies to piping that carries gas. So instead of adopting a whole new code about gas lines, we just use the plumbing code because the same standards apply to both. And if you are installing a new main water line or a main sewer line from the street to the house, you would need a plumbing permit for that. And plumbing permits are also required if you're installing a whirlpool or a massage tub or a hot tub. And if you're installing a hot tub at your house, please let me know, because I'd like to come over to your house and try it out. But plumbing permits are required for all of those. And plumbing permits are not required for repairs. In fact, you might start seeing a pattern here when permits are and are not required. Generally, permits are not required if you're just doing a repair. If you're just doing a repair to something in your home, you generally do not need a permit for that. But again, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We're happy to answer those questions. And then if you are replacing a plumbing fixture with the same size fixture at the same location, you do not need a plumbing permit. For example, if you're replacing a toilet with a toilet of the same size at the same location, you don't need a permit. But if you're removing a sink and you're installing a vanity that has two sinks, where only one sink was there beforehand, you would need a permit for that. Are there any questions about plumbing permits and when they are or are not required? And I'll move on to HVAC permits, but again, feel free to type in any questions in the chat. So heating, ventilation, and air conditioning permits are required when you are replacing an air conditioner or a heat pump or replacing a furnace. HVAC permits are also required if you're installing new supply ductwork, if you're installing new return ductwork, or if you're installing new mechanicals to serve a room addition that did not exist before, or you're upgrading the mechanicals for a remodel or something like that, then a permit would be required. Also, if you're installing a vented or ventless fireplace or heating unit, you also need permits for that. And unfortunately, there are situations in which a vendor or a contractor will say you do not need permits for a ventless fireplace when in fact you do. So again, we would encourage you to reach out to the city. If you just want to double check anything that a contractor or a vendor or store tells you, we'd be happy to confirm if that information is correct or not. And HVAC permits are not required for repairs or replacing floor registers or repairing ductwork or repairing a furnace or air conditioner or heat pump. And if you are like me, I live in a house that is about 20 years old. When it got to around 17, 18 years old, I was having a lot of problems with my furnace, and it seemed like I was calling the HVAC contractor out every maybe two or three times a year to help me with repairs to extend the life of that furnace. And I did not need to get a permit for those repairs. In fact, if I had to get a permit every time I had to call the contractor out to fix it, that would have been a headache. So yeah, you do not need permits just to call a contractor out to do repairs on existing mechanicals in your home.
I have a question. Does a window air conditioning unit count as air conditioning in this case?
That is a great question, and that is a great segue to this slide. Thank you for asking that question. It's a great segue into this. And to answer that question, the window air conditioner itself does not need a permit. But if you need to install new wiring to serve that window air conditioner, that new wiring would need a permit. If you have an existing electrical receptacle that is located in a convenient spot to power that window air conditioner, then you're fine. You don't need anything from the City of Westerville. However, if you need to install a new electric receptacle for that window air conditioner, then the air conditioner doesn't need a permit, but the new electric receptacle would. And it is perfectly permissible to use window air conditioner units as a way to cool a home. In other words, you do not need a central air conditioning system if you don't want one. I hope that answers the question. And If there's any other questions, please feel free to type those in the chat. And now we're going to talk about electric permits and when electric permits are and aren't required. And examples of when electrical permits are required is when you're replacing your service panel, which is often, which I call the breaker box. So if you are getting rid of your old breaker box and putting in a new one, or if you want to upgrade your breaker box, you would need an electrical permit for that. You also need an electrical permit when you are installing new wiring for 2 or more fixtures or outlets or boxes. So if you're just installing new wiring for one switch, you would not need a permit for that. But if you are installing new wiring for anything else, then you would need to get a permit. In addition, you need a permit for baseboard heating and window air conditioning, following up on the question that we just asked, clothes dryer, range, ceiling fans. So if you have any of these fixtures, a baseboard heater, a window air conditioner, a clothes dryer, a range, a ceiling fan, and you do not have a electrical service or an electrical outlet that's at a convenient location to serve those fixtures, and you want to install a new outlet, you would need a permit for that. Also, you need a permit for a standby generator and solar panels, or if you want to install a electric vehicle charging station at your house, which we're seeing more of those now. We're seeing more standby generators being installed in houses, solar panels. In fact, if you drive around the city, it's actually getting to be somewhat common to see some solar panels on people's roofs or at some of the commercial businesses in the city. And electrical vehicle charging stations are becoming more popular, especially at city facilities. We have 2 spots behind the library here and some other electrical vehicle charging stations scattered throughout the city. Permits are not required if, again, you're just doing general electrical repairs, if you're replacing existing outlets or existing switches, or if you're just taking one breaker out of your service panel because it's, breakers have a lifespan to them, and if your breaker dies and if you're installing a new one in, you do not need a permit for that. If you're replacing fixtures, you do not need a permit, and if you're replacing a heating element and a water heater, you don't need a permit for that. Any questions about electric permits?
For any of these permits, if somebody is going to hire somebody to do the work, does the person doing the repairs, are they supposed to ask to see the permit
Wonderful.
Before they start work?
Wonderful question. That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So under the state of Ohio, the property owner is ultimately responsible for getting the permit. Now, it's fine if the property owner wants to defer that authority to the contractor. And that happens often. Contractors often get permits on behalf of the property owner. But if there's a situation where work was done and that work required a permit and a permit was not issued, then the property owner would ultimately be responsible for that. So that's why that's why it's so important to get this message out and to let property owners know that if you have any questions, if you're getting some information from a contractor alleging that a permit is not required, feel free to reach out to us and we can provide some additional information and peace of mind to let you know that yes, what the contractor is saying is correct, or no, you in fact do need a permit for this. And then yes, once that permit is issued, it has to remain on site and accessible by the inspectors. When the inspectors are doing the inspection, that permit would have to be available so the inspectors can document the disposition of the inspections. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Right. Okay, and now after electric permits, we're going to talk about zoning permits. So just like how a building permit confirms compliance or non-compliance with the building code, a zoning permit confirms compliance or non-compliance with the zoning code. And you might recall the slide from the building permit deck we were talking about. It's a little bit convoluted with whether or not you need a building permit for a deck based on whether it's attached to the house or the height or the square footage. It's a little bit easier with zoning permits. If you are building a deck in the city of Westerville, you need a zoning permit. You don't always need a building permit, but you do need a zoning permit. So regardless of the size of the deck and the location and the configuration of the deck, if you are doing a deck in the city of Westerville, you need at least a zoning permit. And then based on the scope of work, you might also need a building permit too. And we do all that work for you. When you submit your application, we'll review it, and the city will let you know whether you just need a zoning permit or if you need a zoning and a building permit. So zoning, and then so why is a zoning permit required for a deck? You know, why would the city be interested in reviewing your deck proposal from a zoning perspective? And the answer to that is to ensure that the deck complies with all the zoning requirements, including side yard setbacks. When you review the city's zoning code, you'll see that there is a provision that requires decks to be located a certain distance from a side yard. And there's also requirements that decks have to be located a certain distance from your rear property line. And there's also requirements about lot coverage. Depending on what zoning district you're located in, you can have around 35% lot coverage. And what that means is you're allowed to cover around 35% of your property with a house or a driveway or a deck or a patio. So that's why we review projects to not only confirm compliance with the building code, but also to confirm compliance with the zoning code, just to make sure you're not inadvertently or accidentally not complying with the zoning provision. So a zoning permit is required for all decks in the city of Westerville, and zoning permits are also required for a fence or a patio, or if you're installing a new driveway, or if you want to expand or extend your driveway. And also, interestingly enough, if you want to have a portable on-demand storage unit at your property for a temporary period of time, a zoning permit would be required. And also for a dumpster. If you're doing some home improvements or some renovation, you would need a zoning permit for a dumpster at your house. If you are interested in building a shed or a gazebo or some type of accessory structure in your backyard, and that accessory structure is larger than 100 square feet, you would need a zoning permit for that as well. Or if you're installing a second accessory structure, regardless of the size of that structure, you would need a permit. And again, just to make sure you're complying with location requirements and zoning setback requirements and things like that. And then if you are lucky enough to live or work in the city's uptown district, you need a permit for just about anything you're going to do on the exterior of a property in the uptown district. The uptown district is located in a architectural review district. And so any exterior work, whether it's a sign or it's renovation or it's installing a canopy, or maybe even something as minor as painting a front door a different color, that requires approval from the city's Uptown Review Board just to verify that that work complies with all of the requirements in the Architectural Review District. But you do not need a zoning permit if you're just doing repairs or if you're replacing a driveway like for like, of the same size, or if you're replacing a patio of the same size, or if you're replacing your landscaping or repairing an existing fence or doing repairs to an existing shed in the backyard. You do not need a zoning permit for that. So those are all the different types of permits in the city: building, electric, HVAC, plumbing, zoning. Are there any questions about those permits, or are there any examples that maybe I didn't cover that I should have covered?
There is a question about the information needed for especially a zoning permit. So do you need to submit blueprints with the application?
Wonderful question. So with a zoning permit, generally we do not need building plans. We do not need blueprints, but what we do need is what's called a site plan. And a site plan is just a bird's eye view of your property, showing everything that's existing and showing what's being proposed. And this site plan does not need to be professionally drawn. The homeowner or the tenant can draw it themselves. What a lot of people do is they will jump on to the Franklin County or Delaware County Auditor's Office, because those two offices have maps of all of the properties in the city of Westerville. And you can print that map out and then just draw on top of that map, you know, where the deck's going to be, or where the patio is going to be, or where the driveway extension is going to be. And then we would just need to know the size of the proposal, whatever it is, you know, the square footage of the proposal, and then the setbacks from the side property lines and front and rear property lines. And again, it does not need to be professionally done. It does not need to be done by a surveyor. You can do that yourself. Any other questions about zoning, the other types of permits?
Yes. I was wondering if you want to just apply drywall or paneling to a basement wall to refinish it, but you're not changing plumbing or electrical, like you're just putting up drywall and carpeting to make it more comfortable, does that require a permit?
It would require a permit if that remodel is going to turn that basement into a bedroom. If it's going to be a rec room or a living room or a space that is not a sleeping space, and all you're doing is changing the wall coverings and nothing else, then no, you would not need a permit for that. But if you are installing new walls, or if you're installing new electric or new lights too, oftentimes because basements are so dark, if you're trying to finish your basement and you're installing new ceiling lights, then you would need a permit for that. And then the point at which somebody might want to convert that space to a sleeping space, it's very important that we get a building permit for that, because in the basement, that's where a lot of our mechanicals are, our gas-fired appliances. We want to make sure that there's no, that the separation requirements are provided from the gas-fired appliances, and that there's no carbon monoxide concerns. And then finally, a egress window, a basement egress window is required for sleeping.
Okay, thank you.
And then here's some contact information. So if anybody has any questions about, you know, you're planning on a weekend project, and you're just not quite sure if a permit is required or not, or maybe you're getting some information from a contractor or a friend or a neighbor, and you just want to double check that information to make sure it's correct, please feel free in calling us. We're at 901-6650. Then on our website, we have very helpful guides and frequently asked questions about just about any weekend project you can think of. And on the screen is the direct link to this information, but you can also easily navigate to this information from the front page of the city's website at westerville.org. So feel free to jump onto the website and navigate to those guides. There's a fence guide, there's a deck guide, there's a patio guide, hot water tank. Just about every weekend project that you can think of is outlined on the website.
How long does it take to get one? Like if you're planning for your contractor to come over and everything, how far ahead do we need to ask for one?
Wonderful question. In fact, this is a great segue into this. And if you don't mind, I'm going to talk about cost and length of time it takes to review these permits in the same slide, if that's okay.
Okay.
So for cost, these are the basic costs for a permit. For a building permit, there's a base cost of $75, and then if that building permit has additional square footage, like it's a room addition or it's a remodel, then in addition to the $75 base fee, there's $5 per 100 square feet of new space or remodeled space. And in the case of a plumbing permit, the base fee is $60 plus $15 per fixture. In the case of an HVAC permit, the base cost is $75 plus $3 per 100 square feet. An electrical permit is $75 plus $5 per 100 square feet, and zoning permits are free. Okay, so let's talk about your question about how long does it take. So for a plumbing, HVAC, and electric permit, we'll turn those around the same day. You come in with your application, you turn in your application. Before you leave, you're going to have the permit in your hand. You get those right away, which is really convenient. We have all of the blank applications on the website, or you can come in person and we can give you a blank application. You can fill it out in the lobby, whichever is easier for you. So plumbing, HVAC, and electrical permits are provided immediately. A zoning permit takes around 1 or 2 days. We can generally turn those around the same day, and if not the same day, maybe within 2 days, we can turn that around. And a building permit, it depends on how many permits are in front of you at the moment that you turn your application in. The state says that the city of Westerville and all the other cities in the state are required to complete reviews of building applications within 30 days. However, the city of Westerville is very proud that we're able to turn around building permits in less than half that time. We can generally have a building permit review completed within 10 to 14 days, or maybe even faster, depending on how many permits are in front of you at the moment that you turn your application in. So if you're doing anything minor, like a fence or electric or HVAC or plumbing, we can generally get those turned around fairly quickly. If you're doing something a little bit more major that requires a building permit, I would encourage that you start the permitting process at least a couple weeks in advance, if not earlier than that.
So question, what are common reasons for Westerville to refuse a permit?
Oh, wonderful question. So the most common reason why the city might not approve a permit is because it's lacking in information. I'll give you a great example. There is a property in the south side of the city that is doing some work on the roof. The roof has fallen into a state of disrepair. And so the property owner hired a contractor to fix the roof. And the contractor wants, instead of replacing the roof trusses are those triangle pieces that make up the roof. Instead of replacing the roof trusses, the contractor wants to replace those roof trusses. Well, the concern is when roof trusses are manufactured, they're engineered to be able to support a certain amount of dead load and live load. And so when any repairs are made to a roof truss, the state of Ohio requires the city of Westerville to ensure that that repair is not going to weaken that roof truss. And so when that contractor submitted some information about repairing that section of the roof, unfortunately, the contractor did not provide any information about how that repair was going to be made. And generally, what we would do is we would say, okay, show us that it's going to be a 2x4. It's going to be maybe two 2x4s on either side of the roof truss, and the nail pattern is going to be a certain type of nail pattern, and that it is going to be able to live up to the live and dead loads that are imposed on that. That's the type of information that we're looking for. And then that information needs to be stamped or sealed by a licensed engineer. And so in that case, we reached back out to the contractor and said, hey, this is a great application. We just need some additional information. And we're waiting for the applicant to submit that additional information before we approve that. So that's a common reason why the city might not approve a permit or an application. Other instances where the city might not approve a permit is when it violates a zoning code. For example, the deck might require 5 feet separation from the deck and the side yard property line. Maybe only 1 or 2 feet are provided. That's another reason why the city might not approve a permit. Any other questions about permits? Because I'd like to just jump in real quick if there's no additional questions about what's the benefit of requiring a permit. Why does the state of Ohio require a permit? Why does the city of Westerville do inspections to ensure compliance with the building code? And the answer to that is it ensures safety. And I don't mean to scare anybody, but one of the most dangerous things that you can put in your house is a gas-fired furnace or a gas-fired hot water heater, because gas-fired appliances emit byproducts, one of which is carbon monoxide. And of course, carbon monoxide, if it's not exhausted in a code-compliant manner, can result in injury or death. And so it is very important to make sure that work is done in a manner that complies with city code and state code in order to ensure safety and in order to ensure that that work was done in a code compliant manner. Now, again, I have a gas-fired hot water heater. I have a gas-fired furnace in my home. And I don't mean to scare anybody, but it's just important that that work is done, because we hear all too often, unfortunately, of situations where a family or a person was inadvertently poisoned by carbon monoxide. So that's one of the reasons why we require permits, and that's one of the benefits of permits, is to ensure safety and to ensure that the work complies with applicable codes. And it also helps the homeowner sell his or her property. There's been situations, unfortunately, when a real estate sale fell through because the current property owner was unable to demonstrate that work that was done in the home was permitted and inspected. And it also helps in financing. Lending institutions are very reluctant to provide financing for work that requires a permit when a permit is not obtained. And it also keeps a contractor honest, and to make sure that that work that the contractor does is done in a safe and code compliant manner. And so what happens when work is done without the permit? Well, that's when you're going to get a knock on the door from either myself or somebody from the Westerville Code Enforcement Division. And again, that's one of the divisions in the Westerville Planning and Development Department. And as the name suggests, the Code Enforcement Division is responsible for enforcing the city's zoning code and the building code and the property maintenance code and the grass and weed code and the nuisance code. And the Code Enforcement Division also enforces decisions of City Council and the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Uptown Review Board and the city's Planning Commission. There are instances in which City Council or the boards and commissions might approve a development, and that approval might have conditions associated with it. And the Code Enforcement Division also enforces the conditions of approval from those boards and commissions. And our Code Enforcement Division is staffed by one supervisor, that's me. We have 2 code enforcement officers, and we have 1 part-time administrative assistant. And I'm very proud of our code enforcement staff and the men and women in our division, because we are a 100% certified code enforcement agency in the state of Ohio. Each state is a little bit different. in how, in whether or not it requires code enforcement officers to be certified or not. In the state of Ohio, the state does not require code enforcement officers to be certified. The state does require building inspectors to be certified, but it does not require code enforcement officers to be certified. However, the city of Westerville has gone above and beyond, and all of our staff are 100% certified. And as with any other certificate in any other profession, we are required to obtain continuing education units in order to maintain our certifications in good standing. And the staff in our division are also very engaged in our state and national professional organization. Our staff is very engaged in the Ohio Code Enforcement Officials Association, OCEOA, and we are very engaged in the American Association of Code Enforcement, ACE, our two professional organizations. And I just wanted real briefly to talk about some of our statistics from 2019 in case there's any questions about that. In 2019, the code enforcement officers investigated 626 code enforcement cases. 494 of those were complaints, 132 of those are patrols. And these code enforcement cases are in addition to all the permits that we inspect and all the building inspections that we do. And of those 626 complaints that we received or patrols that we conducted, code enforcement officers identified 866 code violations in the city in 2019. And those may be as minor as, a high grass violation or a parking violation, all the way up to, an unsanitary condition or a serious nuisance or work that was done without a permit. And also in 2019, the city performed 11 abatements. And what that is when you look at city code, there are some instances where if there's a violation and that violation is not corrected, that the city writes a ticket. And then there are other situations in which if there's a violation and that violation is not corrected, the city can go out and fix that violation and charge the property owner for correcting that violation. And that's called an abatement. And examples of an abatement would be high grass where the city mowed the property, or maybe noxious weeds or trash. And in 2019, the city mowed 10 properties and we removed trash from one property. And the cost of that was assessed to the property owner. And another reason why I am really proud of the staff that work in the city's code enforcement division is that in 2019, the code enforcement officers were able to resolve 93% of the code enforcement cases in 2019 voluntarily, without having to escalate enforcement and without having to write a ticket, and without having to go to court. And that's another reason why I love working in the city of Westerville. So in 93% of the cases in 2019, all a code enforcement officer had to do was to go to a property owner or to go to a tenant or to go to a business owner and say, hey, I just wanted to let you know the city received a complaint, or maybe we saw something on patrol, and this condition, whatever it is, does not comply with city code. And all the code enforcement officer had to do was bring that situation to the attention of the responsible party. In 93% of the cases, that situation was resolved voluntarily. That number fluctuates, as low as 92% or as high as 97% year after year after year. We have a great community. We have great property owners, great tenants, great business owners. And all we need to do is reach out to them and say, hey, we have a code, it says this, you may not have been aware of it. Can you correct this situation? And 93% of the time it is corrected. However, in 2019, 7% of the cases we had to escalate enforcement. And 7% of the cases equated to 46 cases in 2019. And in 46 cases, we had to write tickets. These are criminal tickets. In fact, we wrote 134 citations in 2019. And why would we write a ticket? Well, we would write a ticket if the situation was very egregious, or if it was very repetitive, or if it persisted for an extended period of time. You know, code enforcement officers routinely issue deadline extensions on top of deadline extensions. And then if it's a situation where a violation after issuing those extensions still isn't corrected, then the code enforcement officer might issue a ticket. And in 2019, we attended court 78 times. Our tickets are heard in Westerville Mayor's Court, Delaware County Municipal Court, and Franklin County Municipal Court. And
we do have a question.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So in the situation that you had mentioned before, where somebody's trying to sell a house and it turns out that a permit had not been obtained, so are they allowed to then go to you and say, this work is already done, but I need you to inspect it?
Wonderful question. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, and the answer is yes.
Is there a fine?
Oh, that's a good question too. So to answer the first question, we do issue retroactive permits, and we will do inspections retroactively. Now, in order to do the inspection, sometimes it might be necessary to remove something in order to do the inspection. And so if that's required, then we may have to remove a section of drywall, or maybe dig up around a post for a deck, just to make, or maybe remove some deck boards just to make sure it was built in accordance with the building code. And then there is technically, it's not a fine, but it is a triple fee penalty. So if a deck permit would cost $75, the city reserves the right to impose a triple fee, or $75 times 3 on that permit application. But again, we really only do that in egregious situations. We're much more interested in making sure that work was done in accordance with city code or state code. And we're not really interested in issuing fines or penalties or anything like that. So we don't always impose that triple fee penalty, just in instances where it's an egregious violation, or the contractor has a history of noncompliance, where we would do that. Any other questions? The other thing I'm really proud about the staff in the Planning and Development Department is that we are very engaged, very connected in the community. Not all of us live in the community. A lot of us do, but not everybody does. But whether we live in the community or not, we are very connected and love this community. As an example, one of our code enforcement officers has been a longtime coach with the Westerville Youth Baseball and Softball League. The other code enforcement officer was on the executive board of the Ohio Code Enforcement Officials Association for several years. And then I serve as the vice president for the American Association of Code Enforcement. I also sit on the board that writes the exams for the nationwide certifications for code enforcement officers. And we have several members in the Planning and Development Department and in the city too that are members of Westerville Neighbor to Neighbor. We have members of the city that are Rotary, longtime Rotary members, including our HR director, our city manager, assistant city manager. I'm also a Rotarian. And I just recently was nominated as the board secretary to the Westerville Rotary Foundation. And then a lot of the staff in the Planning and Development Department, we volunteer for the Westerville Habitat Partnership. That's our local Habitat for Humanity habitat organization. And we every year they do a wall build. And our last wall build was supposed to be 3 Saturdays ago, in which I don't know if anybody's ever participated in this or not, but 3 Saturdays ago we were scheduled to build walls at the point over at Otterbein to be used at a building site off-site. And unfortunately, because of COVID, we were not able to do the wall build last year, but we had several planning and development department staff members participate in the wall build last year, and we are looking forward to participating in the wall build next year once COVID is over. And many others, we have people, including myself, that religiously donate blood to the American Red Cross. I just donated not that long ago, and my next donation is scheduled for October. So we love the city. This is our city, whether we live here or not. And we love volunteering for the city. And we also love volunteering for our professional organizations. That's a shameless plug about the city staff. But this is a good moment to stop to see if there's any other questions about what I've talked about. And if not, I wanted to talk about some common offenses that we see out in the field.
Can you name some things that are Westerville specific and not state specific?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Great question. The best example of that is our zoning code. Our zoning code is a Westerville zoning code. All cities in the state of Ohio are required to comply with the building code, the state building code, the state electric code, plumbing code, HVAC code. But there is no state zoning code. So each city, each village, each township will typically adopt their own zoning code, as did the city of Westerville. Another example is our property maintenance code. Back in 2000, the city adopted a property maintenance code, which outlines the minimum standards that a property has to be, that a property has to follow in order to not be a nuisance to a neighbor or something like that. So those are city codes, not state codes. Any other questions?
Yes, I've taken care of the elderly my whole life, and very oftentimes they will inadvertently get into situations that could get them in trouble that way. Do you have any, kind of exceptions if there's a situation like that, or some organization that can help them with that?
I am so glad you brought that up, and in fact, I had that on my notes, and I neglected to say that. So thank you for asking that question. As I indicated, about 93% of the cases that we came across in 2019 were resolved voluntarily without having to escalate enforcement. And it is very common for a code enforcement officer to come across a situation in which a code violation is a result of a financial hardship, or maybe a mental health hardship, or maybe a disability hardship. And in those situations, the code enforcement officer works very hard in connecting that person with resources that are already existing in the community. Of course, we all know about WARM. WARM is a wonderful, wonderful organization. We often link people up to those, up to the services provided by WARM, but we also have other resources that we can connect people with. And I am very excited and very proud to share that in 2019, the City of Westerville Code Enforcement Division partnered with the Ohio State University College of Social Work, and a licensed social work intern was assigned to the Code Enforcement Division and accompanied code enforcement officers in the field. And when those situations were identified, the social worker helped the responsible party get connected to resources in the community. So it is not a blank check. We will not look the other way if the violation is a result of a need. But we will work very hard in connecting that person with resources in the community to get that need fixed. Thank you for asking that question. Okay. So I thought this, we're getting towards the end of the presentation, and I thought it might be good to end on some common offenses that we see out in the field. Let's start with work that was done without a permit. Here's two examples of work that was done without a permit. It's very evident that this toilet on the left was done without a permit, and it's very evident this shower on the right was done without a permit, because in no situation would the building code allow a toilet to be on stairs like that, and in no situation would we allow an electrical receptacle to be in a wet location like that. Those are situations that are not permissible, and it's evident that this work was done without a permit. And here are some examples of building code violations. The state building code does not allow a vehicle to be used as a room addition, as shown in the picture on the left. And also the state building code does not allow a door to enter upon a stairway like that. Very, very dangerous, and it's not allowed by the city code. Or state code, I should say. It's not allowed by the state code. And here's an example of a vehicle parked on the grass. And our zoning code prohibits cars from being parked on the grass. Also, our zoning code requires vehicles that are on the outside of a property to have an engine, and they have to be licensed. So there's actually 3 violations here in this car. This vehicle is parked on the grass, does not have an engine, and it does not have a license. So that's a 3-for-1 in that picture. And you may or may not be aware that we have a grass code in the city of Westerville, and the grass code says that grass has to be mowed, and noxious weeds are prohibited. But who would have thought that you might have to mow your swimming pool, or you might have to mow your hot tub? Here are photographs of a situation where people have let their swimming pools and their hot tubs fall into disrepair. And violate not only state code, but violate city code also. And fire code. We have a fire code here in the city of Westerville, and the state of Ohio also has a fire code. And it is not permissible to remove a smoke detector and replace it with a Jiffy Pop. In fact, if there was a fire inside of this house and it got to a point where it started popping that popcorn, the occupants in that house would be in a tough position. So in this case, the Jiffy Pop had to be removed and a smoke detector had to be installed. And here's another photograph that violates 2 codes. This violates our electrical code, and it also violates our plumbing code. This is a situation where the property owners was required to fix it and remove that electrical hazard. This condition certainly is hazardous, and the property owner was required to fix that. And here's another situation. HVAC units have to be on a sturdy base, and obviously this unit is not on a sturdy base. That wooden stool and those bricks are not a suitable base for an HVAC unit. And signs, we didn't talk about signs in this presentation, but signs, the city of Westerville has a very aggressive sign impoundment program in which signs that are in the right-of-way or the tree lawn or maybe attached to a street sign or an electric pole, we remove those. And in fact, in 2019, we removed about 680 signs out of the right-of-way. And the number fluctuates anywhere from 600 up to 1,000 signs sometimes. And if you don't know Jessica, Jessica is a great librarian. She always goes above and beyond. And all of these photographs were taken at Jessica's house. So thank you, Jessica, for going above and beyond and letting me take those pictures. I really appreciate it. With that, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer those questions now. And if you think of something later on, please feel free to reach out to us. We are located right behind the library at 64 East Walnut Street. We share a parking lot with the library, so we're neighbors, and feel free to stop by. Our COVID hours are 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. and we are closed from 11:30 to 12:30 for sanitation. So please feel free to stop by between 8 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. or anytime between 12:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Also, feel free to call us at 901-6650 or send us an email at codeenforcement@westerville.org. As I indicated earlier in the presentation, we have a frequently asked questions section on the planning and development